History is written by the victors, right? That's an old phrase indeed, but have you ever questioned it? Hey, Cypher here. I often hear people say history is written by the victors. It's used so often that it's considered commonsensical in some circles, but I'm here to tell you that that is not true in the slightest, and how incorrect this myth actually is. This wouldn't be such a concern if it weren't used perniciously. You see, some people use it to try to dismiss history, as though since only the victors write it, we don't get the whole story, and thereby history is useless. And I'm just going to get it out ahead of time. That's downright false, if not utterly stupid. This myth is often attributed to Napoleon, but it actually predates him by quite a bit, and there's no actual quotes to put it to him. It seems to have just boiled up as if it were a folktale. The idea is that any culture who takes control writes a favorable history of themselves, and those of whom they have power over are so subjugated that they can't write their own history. Of course, even the very structure of that is flawed. History is complicated and victory is often Pyrrhic. Furthermore, that means that we take for granted that subjugated people can't write their own history. While there are many ideas like Gramscian cultural hegemony and the subaltern that play into this idea of subjugated people, that is not to say that some abstract victor has absolute control over anything that's written. We can talk about those theories at some other point if you'd like, but they're much too complicated for this argument. But they're not referring to what most people would consider victors, at least in this strain of the saying. And in a country like the United States, this seems to be an especially foolish notion. We let clear losers like neo-Nazis and the KKK continue to publish stuff, despite obviously being on the wrong side of history. I mean, after all, how could I have this on my shelf if losers didn't write the history? But let's look at this with a more historic lens. The whole victors thing is obviously supposed to espouse people who win in battle. So let's take ancient Greece as an example. The Peloponnesian War was fought in the late 5th century BC between Athens and Sparta. These two duked it out until Sparta finally won and took control of the peninsula. Now, for this myth to be true, there would have to only be favorable accounts of Sparta's taking control. The problem is this guy. Thucydides here wrote about the Peloponnesian War. Of course, you would think if this myth were true, he would be a Spartan or writing favorably of Sparta. Neither is the case. He was an Athenian. And this book is often hailed as the best work of history until Gibbon's book in 1789 AD. So the second historian ever was writing from the losing side. There's a long historiography of people writing from the losing side. Look at the American Civil War, for example. There's obviously writing from both the South and the North, and there is an entire strain of historians who write in what is often called the lost cause. Many Southern historians like to portray the South in a favorable light, and sometimes they even try to change the name of the Civil War to things like the War of Northern Aggression. Some accounts try to negate the role of slavery altogether. And this is pretty much a case of the losers writing a little bit too much. But sometimes the losers could be considered the minority cultures, or women in history, or the lower classes. And for the last half century or so, in the history profession, there has been a rising amount of literature on race, class, and gender studies. It's so pervasive that some historians think that race, class, and gender are the only subjects to talk about. Hell, in class, I've voiced concerns about identity politics being the sole criterion of analysis in recent historiography. And some of my classmates were audibly flabbergasted. So in the case of race, class, and gender, clearly the victors do not control the narrative. So do the victors write the history? Well, depending on your definition, of course. But there's other people writing as well. To use the phrase, "the history is written by the victors" derisively, so as to dismiss the story, is purely incorrect and betrays a lack of understanding of how the world truly is. We live complicated lives in a complicated society, strung together by an even more complicated past. When people say history is written by the victors, they forget that. So thanks for watching, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.